What's going on, guys? My name is Frank, this little one is named Void, and in this video we're going to talk about how you should handle your leopard geckos. Selling in the billions each year, Rainbow Mealworms is your one-stop shop for all your insect needs. Their quality feeders and A+ customer service keep me coming back to support the health and growth of all of our animals. Visit them today at rainbowmealworms.net to place your order. Okay, so the first point of the video is how to handle a leopard gecko that was just born. If you're a brand new leopard gecko keeper, you're probably not going to run into this because most leopard geckos are not sold until they are kind of already into the juvenile stage or well off on their own. Occasionally, you will find really small geckos that were just hatched a couple weeks prior, and so it's good to know how to handle these very small geckos just in case you have to, or if you're an aspiring breeder and you get your babies for the first time. Now, as you can see in this video, this little baby was just born today. It's brand new. It barely has its bearings yet. You will often see little baby leopard geckos when they first come out. They'll be a little bit shaky, a little bit wobbly, and for the most part, you don't want to handle them at all for the first 2 to 3 weeks. But as you're cleaning, or if you happen to sell the gecko, or if you happen to need to pick the gecko up, here's how you want to be transporting it. As you can see in this video, I'm going to use the crawl on technique to pick the gecko up, where I will simply put my hand down and encourage the gecko to crawl onto my hand. Once the gecko's on your hand, the hard part is somewhat over, but now you have to get the gecko to balance on your hand and stay there. To do this, I would encourage you to make slow, calculated movements. So nothing surprising to the gecko. You don't want to quickly swoop your hand over the top of it or jump up or startle the gecko in any way. And if you can't tell yet, the best way to get comfortable with handling your leopard gecko is on the floor. This way, if the gecko does happen to jump out of your hand, which is fairly common, then at least it jumps onto the floor from a short distance instead of from you standing up. Now, another thing that you might want to be aware of is if you can get into a small enclosed area, or if you could set up like a little playpen around you, just so that you don't have to worry about the gecko getting into any small nooks or crannies. Little baby leopard geckos are absolutely mischievous, and they will look for any little nook or cranny to get into, and it might scare you and freak you out and cause you to grab the gecko really quick. To avoid all of that anxiety between you and the gecko, set up a pen around you or go into a closet or something where the gecko cannot get into anything that you're worried about it getting into, and therefore you can still move slowly, you can move gently, you can continually offer the gecko your hand and nudge them to crawl onto instead of having to reach real quick and grab the gecko from running under the bathroom sink or something. I did lose a hamster once that way when I was like 8 years old. I remember me and my sister were like mortified that we lost this little hamster. We were doing exactly what I'm telling you right now, playing with the hamster in the bathroom, and there was a little hole under the sink that led into the vents, and we didn't see that and didn't block it. And so as the hamster's walking around the bathroom, sure enough, it crawls into that hole, into the vents. We could hear the hamster in the vents, and we just couldn't get it out of the vents, and it probably died there, unfortunately. You don't want that to happen to your leopard gecko. Now, once the leopard gecko is on your hand and you're comfortably seated down, there are a couple techniques that I like to use to train the gecko and to get them comfortable. Technique number 1, you'll want to allow the gecko to just crawl from hand to hand. As the gecko crawls from hand to hand, in its mind, it thinks it's moving, it thinks it's getting away a little bit, and in your mind, you're keeping control of the gecko and everything's all good. Unfortunately, from this position, the gecko can easily jump out of your hand, run up your sleeve, which leads to method number 2, which is allow the leopard gecko to crawl on top of you. This can be one of the funnest and most rewarding ways for your leopard gecko to interact with you, is just letting it crawl on you. It will use you sort of as like a little rock or tree of sorts, and it will just crawl up your arm. It might sit on your shoulder. From this position though, you want to be careful because it can get stuck on your back. And if you panic a little bit and happen to like move your back against a wall or a chair or something that's behind you, you might accidentally hurt the gecko and not realize it, or you might just have a really difficult time trying to get the leopard gecko. So just keep that in mind. You might want to be able to holler down to your parents or somebody in your house to help you out. Okay, now moving on to juveniles, it's pretty much the same as little babies. This is the size gecko that you will mostly be buying if you are a first-time leopard gecko keeper. Once the gecko is a month and a half to 2 months old, it's a lot more sturdy than it is when it is on day one just born. So you could get away with a little bit more. But in general, you want to replicate the same techniques. Open-handed handling, allowing the gecko to walk from hand to hand. Some people call it treadmilling. And also letting the gecko crawl all over your body. But just be careful again not to crush it. It is still small and it is still a delicate gecko. Because of how small the gecko is, it's still a good idea to sit in an enclosed area, somewhere where if the gecko happens to get away, you don't have to quickly run after it and try to grab the gecko, scaring it as well as potentially causing it to drop its tail because you grab it real fast in the wrong place or something. Now, leopard geckos at this size, they can be handled regularly. You do not need to worry about like the little babies, how you don't want to handle them. You just want to let them grow. At this size, the leopard gecko can be handled every day, 2 to 3 times a day if you want. And that constant interaction is also going to help train your leopard gecko to be calm and comfortable with you so that by the time it's an adult, it will for the most part just sit in your hand. It will be good to bring to parties or shows. Your friends, they'll be able to handle it because it's had a lot of interaction in its life. A lot of people are worried about over interacting, but once the leopard gecko is a month and a half to 2 months old, I don't really think there's any level of over handling. But if you do start to see stress signs like the gecko constantly closing its eyes, the gecko biting you, the gecko pooping, the gecko waving its tail, or just constantly like darting away and never calming down, then you might want to give the leopard gecko a rest. And even with somewhat tame geckos, that can happen. Not this Black Knight, but there was another Black Knight that I've brought to 2 parties now, and it would let people handle it for the first like hour and a half, but then once that last half hour of the show came, it would start biting the kids, and I felt so bad because I was like, okay, I knew the first time that this happened that this was a potential issue, but it's a really nice gecko. Maybe it will work its way out of this. So I brought it to another show, and it bit another kid about an hour and a half into our show as well, and the kids were great with it. They were really understanding. But it's still scary to get bit. People can kind of pull away, you know, and that could wind up causing to fling the gecko. That reminded me of a super funny story when I was like 8 or 9 years old when I got my first leopard gecko. I was doing this exact technique with the playpen and all that kind of stuff, and it bit me. And I pulled my hand back because it's frightening a little bit, you know, and I remember the gecko flying up into the air like 4 or 5 feet and then hitting the carpet. I was on the ground, so it didn't go up that high, and it was an adult by then, or like sub-adult, so it could well handle that cushioned carpet fall, so the gecko did not get hurt at all. It still went on to live a long, lengthy, healthy life, but the story was so funny just reflecting back. It's scary when you get bit. Whether you're a child or whether you're older, you're probably going to have a knee-jerking reaction, and you just want to protect the gecko and yourself from that. Now, lastly, if you're handling adult leopard geckos, most likely by this point in their life, they are going to be very calm. They can be out for hours on end at a show, at a party, just personal with you on the couch watching TV, but you still want to look for those stress signs of pooping, biting, extra flightiness. There are a small percentage of geckos that seem to have a little bit more attitude than others naturally, and no matter what you do, they might not calm down, but for the most part, I want to say 99% of leopard geckos, if you handle them in the right way, they will calm down, even if they were once aggressive. But breeding can also put a strain on things, so if you grab an adult leopard gecko after touching another male or another female, it might smell those pheromones on you, and it might start waving its tail because it thinks you're a gecko and it doesn't want to breed, or it thinks you're a rival male and so it wants to fight your hand. You know, so you have to keep those things in mind. In spite of those things, if you just have one leopard gecko in your home and there's no like breeding pheromones going on and around, most likely 99% of the time you're going to have an excellent pet that will just hang out with you 24/7. So what did you think about this video, video, guys, I wanted to hit some topics that people asked me to cover in the past, and also topics that I think are going to get searched a lot on YouTube because that really helps us grow. So I'm always down for talking about the more complicated and somewhat controversial topics because I think that's the way that people learn. But a lot of these beginner and novice level topics are great to cover for the hobby. So I thank you guys for watching and engaging with me in this video. Recommend some more content below in a comment that you would like for us to cover. I'm still writing them all down. It's been a little bit of a busy last couple of 3 months or so, but I promise you I have not forgotten. My goal is at some point to be doing 2 videos a week this year, and I think that that's going to be possible. Also, keep an eye out for our website updates, which I will notify you on YouTube as well as Instagram and Facebook, all our platforms, because we are going to have some geckos for sale soon, and I would love to get them to their new home into your hands should you wish. So thank you for joining me once again in this Geeky Gecko Creations video. I'll see you next time, and remember, until then, have a geeky gecko great day. Peace!